Hello and welcome to November's Student Educational Talks. My name is Cooper Bailey, and as always, I'm your host. We have some fantastic presentations lined up for you tonight, so we'll go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to read ANCODA's mission statement as always. Our focus is to offer an international community for healthcare students with passion in oncology and pharmaceutical industry. We provide education, leadership, mentorship, and opportunities in research and community outreach. We promote unique and dynamic experiences for students to collaborate with all oncology stakeholders. I'd like to welcome all of the established ANCODA chapters. We are always amazed at the work you do and love your continued support. Next, I would like to welcome all of the in-progress ANCODA chapters. We are thrilled to welcome you one day to the ANCODA PSO family. And last, as always, welcome all students listening in. As you know, ANCODA provides our student educational talks to all students, regardless of membership. ANCODA is growing by leaps and bounds. We are now 4,300 plus members and 750 plus practices strong. Working together, we become stronger. Stay up to date on all ANCODA student events and resources by following the ANCODA PSO Facebook and Instagram pages. I'll take a quick moment to have anyone who has not already followed our pages scan the QR codes presented on your screen and follow. Thank you. Also, don't forget to follow the ANCODA LinkedIn page for all national updates. I am very excited to announce that the ANCODA Oncology Association Management Fellowship application is now open. Please apply on ANCODA's website under the Community tab. For questions regarding applications, please reach out to ANCODA's Austin Starkey at the email provided on your screen. I would also like to recognize that ANCODA will be hosting a fellowship showcase event December 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Meeting information will be coming soon, so watch out for that. Any questions regarding the showcase event, please reach out to your host. I would like to welcome our first presenter, ANCODA's own Kevin Scorsone, Associate Manager of Patient-Centered Initiatives, Legislative and Policy Liaison, and possibly the world's best game show host. Kevin will be presenting on current legislative updates impacting patient care.
Cooper, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here tonight. I love doing the student educational talk so much that I decided to take time out of my birthday dinner to be here and present to all of you. But as Cooper mentioned, my name is Kevin Scorsone. I am the Legislative and Policy Liaison at ANCODA. I oversee our Legislative and Policy Advisory Committee. That committee was formed almost a year ago now, and our main responsibility and objective is to educate our membership, educate the world of oncology, and keeping them aware and up to date on all things that pertain to their careers in the legislative environment, whether that be the federal or the state legislation. So again, I want to thank Cooper and Austin for allowing me to be here tonight, and I won't take up much of your time this evening. What I hope to do is to make you aware of some terms that you might have heard in passing. Maybe you were curious as to what they were. And hopefully by the end of this, you have some questions. You can ask me any questions that you might have, or you can reach out to me via email. You can get that information from Cooper. And I'd be more than happy to talk to you about anything in terms of legislation or how it might impact you and how it might impact your future career. So the first thing I wanted to touch on was Brown, white, and clear bagging. You hear this a lot of the time. We'll start with brown bagging. Brown bagging is the dispensing of medication from a pharmacy. It's typically from a specialty pharmacy directly to a patient. They then transport the medication to the physician's office where it is administered. Some concerns that we have with that include the fact that the drug comes to the patient directly and is in the patient's custody. From a quality standpoint, there is a possibility the drug may sit in a mailbox for some time before it is retrieved. It might sit on the porch while the patient's at work or isn't aware that the package has arrived. It's sitting out in the sun. It can be impacted by those high temperatures, which sometimes is not appropriate. It may seem convenient for patients to receive their drugs at home, but it may not be as safe as having the drug available at a practice when a patient arrives for treatment. So that again is brown bagging. White bagging is the distribution of patient-specific medication from a pharmacy, typically a specialty pharmacy. This goes to the physician's office, hospital, or clinic where it is administered. Some of the concerns that have been addressed here include the fact that this requires a lot of coordination. The insurer's pharmacy needs to know where to send the medication. The care team must know when to expect it, as some medications need to be refrigerated. If the medication is left in a box for a prolonged time in high temperatures, again, that can ruin the integrity of the drug. There's also the risk that the medication will not arrive to the clinic on time, leading to delays in care, and that's the last thing we want for a patient. Finally, clear bagging. When a cancer program or practice maintains its own specialty pharmacy that provides prescribed medication directly to the clinic, providers are more open to clear bagging because usually it doesn't lead to delays. Practices can use drugs from their own inventory and have full custody of the product, which can guarantee the integrity of the treatment. White and brown bagging policies have the potential to delay the administration of a particular drug to a patient, as we mentioned, which is a huge deal, especially to a cancer patient and their family. For example, as the purchasers of pharmaceutical products under these policies, the payers, instead of the providers, are responsible for making sure the product is delivered. And it's pivotal to ensure these products are also delivered promptly. The ANCODA Legislative and Policy Advisory Committee has written statements voicing our concerns with some of these policies. You can see all of our statements online at ancoda.org by going to our news tab there. You can see all the statements that we've released in the last year. A couple of other things before we move on. There's also the potential for duplication of therapy when multiple teams are involved in dispensing. And finally, these bagging mandates can come from both insurance plan or employers. For these reasons, it's important to stay educated on these and speak with your employers ahead of time. If any of you have any questions regarding these policies, you can put those in the chat box, and I'd be more than happy to address them at the end of my spiel here. I do want to touch on something that has been a main focus of ours on the committee, and that is pharmacy benefit managers. Pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, are third-party administrators contracted by health insurance plans, unions, government agencies to manage prescription drug benefit programs. They adjudicate claims, manage pharmacy networks, determine drug formulas. They set copays, they set prior authorization criteria, and the criteria for the patient's choice of pharmacy. And again, the patient's choice of pharmacy. So we're having basically these third-party administrators choosing the patient's pharmacy for them. And you can probably understand how that causes problems. In pharmacy school, I am not, just a little background on me, I am not a pharmacist by trade. I am a history and political science major. After college, I started working for the New York State Legislature. From there, I transitioned to running the government affairs office for the North Carolina Nurses Association. That's where I got my start in healthcare. But in pharmacy school, I'm sure that you have heard the term pharmacy middlemen when you've learned or heard about PBMs. This is because PBMs are hidden between the patient's insurance company, who the PBM works for, and the pharmacy, who the PBM reimburses for dispensing the medication. PBMs can own their own pharmacies, including retail and mail order stores. Patients may be forced to use mail order or only purchase medications from a PBM-owned pharmacy, such as CVS, which may lead to fragmentation of care and delays in treatment. The great thing about what NCODA is doing, NCODA is always looking to improve the environment that we're all in, the oncology world, the oncology arena. And we're working to change that system with PBMs by working with Prime, as you might have heard at our fall summit or in our news releases. And NCODA is committed to making the system better, not eliminating a system, by revolutionizing a system and making pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, a tool that could actually work for the patients. And as always, everything we do here, it's for the patients. And that's important to know. Even with this committee, we are not an advocacy group. We are an educational group, and we're trying to educate legislators, whether it be state legislatures, federal legislators. We're here to educate them, to hopefully give them better perspective on some of these laws and how it's going to impact patients. And the last thing I want to touch on tonight is probably one of the biggest issues that has been in the world of oncology for years, even before I joined NCODA a year and a half ago: copay accumulator programs, instituted by insurers and pharmacy benefit managers to track your accumulated out-of-pocket expense and prevent manufacturer coupons from counting towards your deductible. These programs accumulate what you, the patient, have paid on your own towards your medication, not counting any coupons used towards the deductible or maximum out of pocket, otherwise the MOOP, M-O-O-P, maximum out of pocket. This leaves patients at risk for unexpected cost sharing when the coupon is exhausted or other medical expenses arise. Consequences with these programs include patients not being able to pay for their medications, and this may lead to non-adherence and poor healthcare outcomes. We want the patients to be able to receive positive quality treatment, and sometimes things like this make that difficult. Excuse me. Finally, let's talk about another iteration of copays accumulators, which is copay maximizer programs. These are instituted by insurers and PBMs, which increase your copay amount for medication and evenly divides it to approximate the manufacturer's coupon's monthly value. All right, so this also prevents manufacturer coupons from counting towards your deductible and your maximum out of pocket. Similar to copay accumulator programs, with these programs, some consequences include non-adherence to medications and poor healthcare outcomes due to patients not being able to afford the cost of their medication. So as you can all see, these programs, they may have a significant negative impact in health outcomes for patients, especially when we consider cancer patients whose medications are extremely costly and they need to be delivered on time and be administered at the right time. It's important to be educated on these matters and stay up to date with what is happening around the country so far. The states that have enacted laws against these programs, you have Arizona, Arkansas, Connecticut, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. So change for the positive is being made. We'd like to see that trend continue. And that is what our committee is focused on doing, providing this information, and hopefully it leads to greater patient outcomes and positive quality treatment for all cancer patients. I will take some questions now. I don't want to hold anyone up too much longer. I think I had till 8:15, so I think Cooper will be happy with me that I hit the deadline here, but I appreciate you all listening to me. If you have any questions or are interested in anything that we're doing legislatively, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to you. Cooper, thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And I will give the students some moments here if they have any questions. I do have one question for you, and that is, as a student, how do you feel the students could possibly get involved with your legislative policy and advocacy committee? Or is there any opportunities that they could get involved or help out with the committee?
Yeah, we're always looking for people to help out, to provide us with information, basically in an ambassador role, maybe provide us with information that could lead to us releasing a statement or educating our membership. See, the great thing about what we're doing here, it's very grassroots. We're trying to extend our wings as much as possible, but we need help right now in the early stages of the committee. So there's opportunity there. And moving forward, I think we're going to continue to develop programs and opportunities specifically for students. We've been discussing potential virtual days at the legislature where we have more educational style back and forth like this, where we bring on committee members of NCODA's LPAC, like Ben Jones, who is the Vice President for Government Affairs at the U.S. Oncology Network, McKesson. So there's stuff like that that is being discussed. And I think if we had student interest in that and students wanting to participate, it would make it easier on our end to get programs like that off the ground.
Yes, thank you for that, Kevin. I think it's a very unique opportunity for students interested in this type of area, but also just interested in being educated on these important topics.
And Coop, like I said, if anybody listening on this call, or you might know someone interested, just reach out to me. I'm easily available. You can email me, you can call me, and I'd be more than happy to talk about opportunities and how you might be able to contribute. I would be more than happy to do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. I will. Oh. All right. Again, a big thank you to Kevin and his time. I know, as everyone can do, if you would like, you can go ahead and throw in the chat, maybe a little happy birthday. It is Kevin's birthday today, and he did take time away to present to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Coop.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next presenter tonight is Tina Lowe, Therapeutic Area Manager, Lung Pan Tumor at Genentech Oncology. She will be continuing our discussion on non-small cell lung cancer, focusing on Genentech's targeted therapy. Tina?
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Awesome.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here as well. Just like Kevin said, my birthday was yesterday. So we actually have very similar birthdays, Kevin, and my family and I went out to dinner last night. So, I took off from work yesterday. So it's, good that it's the day after. I'm refreshed and ready to kind of deliver this presentation. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I did go to pharmacy school and graduated many years ago, went to the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia, and actually started off my career as a clinical oncology pharmacist, did the whole residency thing. And, found out that, working in a hospital setting really isn't for me. So I transitioned into pharmaceutical industry at that point, and have been doing many years on the commercial side mostly. But, one thing that I will say for any of you guys interested in coming into the pharmaceutical world is that having that pharmacy degree certainly will serve you all very well. There are so many different options and paths that you can take within the pharmaceutical industry, whether it be medical, commercial. For myself, I've been in sales, I've been in sales training, I've been a market specialist where I was a speaker for my company within hepatology. I've been, marketing, and I've been in all different therapeutic areas. I've been in respiratory, infectious disease, hepatology, women's health. And that's one of the benefits of being a pharmacist. You really could go where your passion is and you can try different things out and you'll pretty much be welcome wherever you go because you do have that awesome background. So with that being said, today what I'll be talking about is targeted therapies. And speaking to my colleague, I understand that last time you guys hit upon biomarker testing, which is such an important field right now within the oncology space. Everybody knows, I think when I first heard about precision medicine, I think it was Steve Jobs from Apple. And, and his pancreatic cancer and how he went with precision medicine and, paid lots of money for the best treatments out there that was targeted and personalized to his type of cancer. Well, I'm really proud to be a part of Genentech because that is also one of the greatest things about working for Genentech is the research and science department of Genentech. And they're very focused on targeted therapies, precision medicine, doing different types of analysis on DNA, RNA. It's really, really fascinating. So now currently my role is I'm an account manager, a therapeutic account manager, and I discuss the different targeted therapies that I'll be going through today, along with immunotherapy, which is another great medication now that's entered into the oncology treatment space along with chemotherapy. So with that introduction, I'm going to share my screen. I'll be sharing some slides with y'all today because I always like to have some visuals. And like Cooper said, we'll primarily be focusing on the non-small cell lung cancer landscape. So the format of the presentation tonight is pretty much going to be, I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of where the therapies and medications have come up to this point. But from there, we're going to dive into each of the 3 different targeted therapies that I currently work with. And with each of those, I'll go through a little bit about how it works, because as pharmacy people, we always love to know the mechanism of action of how each of these drugs work, right? So we'll go through how it works, go through the pivotal studies that got these medications approved to market. You'll find that the safety is extremely redundant. So what I'll do is I'll kind of just call out some of the safety features, or not features, but the safety profile of each of the medications, but I won't go into it that much. You can always pull up the package insert and read the list. And I'll try to throw in a few pearls of pharmacy that might interest you guys as we go along. And that'll be pretty much it. So let's see here. Okay, so for starters, I just kind of wanted to, we talked a little bit about the history of biomarker driven medications. And back when I was in school, chemotherapy and radiation therapy was really the only treatment available to a lot of these cancer patients. In 2000, around there was the discovery of the first biomarker called EGFR. In fact, I had a relative that recently had non-small cell lung cancer, EGFR positive. And there's a medication out there called Tagrisso that they were put on, and they didn't do very well, and they ended up passing away. But EGFR, you'll hear that terminology a lot, just because it is one of the hottest biomarkers that people are testing for. PD-L1 is another one. And that was kind of the first entrance of these sort of biomarker targeted therapies. 10 years later, there was the ALK. There was the ALK discovery, which is all of these biomarkers really is, when you think about, our genomes and DNA, it's, certain parts of the DNA sequence that usually something goes awry, and usually you'll have either a mutation or a fusion or something goes wrong in our bodies. And that is kind of the tumor driver of the cancer. And so what companies like to do is they like to try to find very specifically targeted therapies to the mutation or the fusion that's happening and kind of block what's going on. And that's really the whole idea behind targeted therapy. It's really just, targeting the particular DNA sequencing that's gone awry in that particular spot on the DNA sequence. So that being said, we have today we're going to talk about an ALK rearrangement. We'll also talk about ROS1, and then we'll also talk about NTRK a little bit, and a little bit of RET too. So it's all these fancy terminologies, but really it's all just, targeted therapy. So I like this slide because it kind of gives you an idea of all the different mutations and rearrangements that are really out there when it comes to metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. So nearly 1 in 2 patients with metastatic non-small cell lung cancer may be eligible for targeted therapy. And that is why biomarker testing is ever so important. And when you test and they test positive for one of these mutations, and you know that there's a therapy that's targeting that particular mutation, you pretty much hit the jackpot. Because all of the survival rates and the results have been very, very good and positive with the studies and in the ones that have been studied. So here is the NCCN guidelines, which we're all very familiar with, and they recommend biomarker testing for genetic variants, and this has shown to improve outcomes. And so one of the jobs that is mine is that I have to talk to pathology. I work with my biomarker testing counterparts, and we try to make sure that all of the accounts that we're covering are adequately testing, and that the whole process is seamless, so that the patients can get the results back and the doctors can get the results back in a timely manner to put the patient on the right therapy in the most appropriate time. Okay, so then this goes into a little bit about thyroid cancer, but it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you'll hear, we're not going to go too much into detail on thyroid cancer, but you'll see that similar to non-small cell lung cancer, there's a long history of different medications that have been approved. There's a lot of like kinase inhibitors that you'll probably have studied in pharmacy school. But these are the competitors that we often deal with, and you'll see in the studies with both thyroid cancer as well as the non-small cell lung cancer. There's cabozantinib, vandetanib, lenvatinib, sorafenib, and these are all, like I said, multi-kinase inhibitors that are all oral. But by the way, they're not infusions, which is, you know, similar. It's like not like chemo. So we've really come a long way that we're able to take oral pills now to help target the cancers. This slide just talks about the fact that molecular profiling is critical. Now they talk about the RET mutation, and the RET, really, there's a medication called Gavreto, which we're going to talk about first, and Gavreto targets the RET fusions. Sometimes the mutations can be passed down from your parents, and that we call that germline mutations. And other times it could be from the environment, so sporadic. You know, could be a multitude of reasons why one could have a RET mutation. So then going into pralsetinib, which is Gavreto, which is one of the medications that I work with. It's a once daily targeted RET therapy for patients with RET positive metastatic non-small cell lung cancer and also advanced thyroid cancers. This is the infamous warnings and precautions that you'll see on most PIs. So we won't go into that too much, but like a lot of these chemo or like these cancer treatments, there's going to be a whole list of side effects that oftentimes the FDA requires the pharmaceutical companies to put on the label. Obviously, not every person is going to get these side effects, but it is something that as a pharmaceutical company, we always have to talk about with our healthcare providers for a fair and balanced message. Like I said before, oftentimes it does get very redundant. So you'll see this across every single, different type of medication, obviously. All right, so NCCN. So let's talk a little bit about NCCN just as a review. Today, we're going to be talking about the medications that are either category 1 or category 2A in recommendation from the NCCN. As a review, category 1 usually means that all of the experts in the field, it's been very well studied, and all the experts agree that this is the recommendation to go. The NCCN category 1 is the recommendation that you want to go for. We don't always have that luxury because within pharma, sometimes it takes years for drugs to develop. In fact, it takes about 13 years or so, and lots of money. So sometimes pharmaceutical companies will first come out with the medication, because there's medical need in the community. So it may not necessarily get the category 1 recommendation right off the bat. However, 2A is the next category after 1. And that usually means that there is low level of evidence. However, there is a uniform consensus from the providers that this is the way to go. So, and then from there, it goes 2B and then so on and so forth. So category 1 and 2A is usually a uniform consensus. One is high level evidence, one is low level evidence, but it's uniform consensus among healthcare providers that this is the way that this particular disease should be treated. So you'll see that Gavreto actually received preferred first-line treatment for RET fusion positive metastatic non-small cell lung cancer, NCCN category 2A. Okay, and usually in oncology, you keep the patient on the medication until the patient progresses, their cancer progresses. Okay, so this is it's recommended also in thyroid cancer, like we talked about before. This is a nice diagram because it talks about the mechanism of action of Gavreto or pralsetinib. So you see here, you have the mutations on the RET portion of the gene sequencing. You'll see here that there's some fusions going on, and then pralsetinib is this blue triangle arrow, and it comes in and it kind of blocks the fusion from happening, therefore providing that anti-tumor activity. So that's pretty much how Gavreto works. Gavreto was approved by the FDA in the famous ARROW trial, where they looked at 3 arms. Most of it is, you'll see, arm 1 was metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. Then you have thyroid cancer for the second arm, and the third arm as well. And they also looked at having, using Gavreto in treatment naive patients, so those that have never received any chemotherapy or any sort of treatment, and then also those who have been previously treated with platinum-based chemotherapy. And platinum-based would be like carboplatin or cisplatin, any platinum-based compound. The demographics here, usually, this would be a good snapshot of the types of patients that are often seen in the doctor's offices. So we always go through this with the physician as well. And then here you'll see, and again, this is going to sound very repetitive as I go on, but all of these drugs obviously work. That's why we're talking about them. That's why they're approved. But as you can see, just kind of for your own knowledge, ORR usually means overall response rate. Okay, so in oncology, sometimes we look at overall survival, that's OS. Sometimes we look at progression-free survival or PFS. There's certainly a lot of acronyms, in these studies, but overall response rate was looked at. So was duration of response, which is DOR. And then there are these like guidelines that they go by called RECIST, which we won't get into right now. But as you can see, it works very well but works better actually in patients that are treatment naive. And that's usually consistent across all oncology treatments. Usually they say the first regimen that they get is generally the most effective. When the patient's body has not yet been exposed to any medication yet, and it has not developed any sort of resistance, and it's, you got a clean slate. And that's usually, the best response. So we see here, those treatment naive patients are 70% overall response rate versus patients that have been previously treated with platinum-based patients had a 57% response rate. But you know what, 57% may not sound like a lot, but in somebody with non-small cell lung cancer, that's actually really good. Okay, a lot of non-small cell lung cancer is something, all cancer is something that definitely can, kill you. So any sort of response rate, survival rate, it's still good. But treatment naive patients do really well. They have overall response rates of 70%. You'll see that the patient size, this is always something also really good to look at, wasn't that great. Only 27 patients versus 87 patients. In general, though, as you remember from the pie chart, the mutations that happen to each type of, each individual, is very different. And so getting a large sample size for these very specific mutation rates is always difficult. So with a lot of targeted therapies, you'll see less patient sample size. All right. So, okay, so that's the results. They also looked at the tumor size and they found that Gavreto, in fact, did reduce the tumor size as well. And this was an exploratory analysis, which means that it wasn't part of the original study endpoint, but it was an exploratory analysis. It's something that they just happened to look at as well. Gavreto, in non-small cell lung cancer, was generally well tolerated. You'll see here the different side effects that had happened, grades 1 through 4 versus grades 3 through 4. And dosage interruptions due to an adverse reaction occurred in approximately 60% of the patients. And that's not uncommon, with any chemotherapy or kinase inhibitors. Patients are going to experience side effects. And so, dose reduction or instructional dose reduction, and that's a huge area of intervention for pharmacists, is definitely something that you'll want to be familiar with. The great thing about Gavreto is that it comes in 100 milligram capsules. And so when you do dose reduce, it's very easy. You don't have to change bottles. So you can just kind of keep the bottle and dose reduce from there. Let's see. The only other thing I wanted to talk about for Gavreto was the fact that it does, and now we're getting into some thyroid results, so we're not going to spend too much time on thyroid because it's way too much, but was the liver abnormalities. So you guys all have heard, CYP3A4, one of the enzyme ways that drugs get metabolized. It's very, very popular within, medications. Everything goes through your liver, right? And Gavreto is one of those medications that does go through the liver. And so you want to avoid co-administration of Gavreto with strong CYP3A inhibitors. It also goes through the P-glycoprotein pathway. So any medications that compete from that pathway, you'll have to, be careful and monitor that as well. I remember in pharmacy school, it was always, like so difficult to memorize, like what's a, CYP3A inhibitor, what's an inducer. And so one thing that kind of helped me was thinking about the CYP3A system. Those are like pathways in the liver, like sort of like easy pass, like when you're driving, the easy pass pathways are like toll booths. So if you have a CYP3A4 or 3A inducer, that means you actually put on the easy pass and you're going to go through that toll booth much faster. Thereby, the toll booth is like your body, so you're going faster through the body and it's going to clear out of your system faster. Versus the CYP3A inhibitor would be taking away the easy pass, so you would have to sit there and pay the cash, so everything is slower, thereby building up the drug levels in your body. So that's kind of a good way that I, think about inhibitors and inducers, and it helps me when I look at the medications. So, all right, so this is the dosing, like I mentioned before, of Gavreto. It's once daily RET inhibitor. It is 400 milligrams, so they would have to take 4 pills, but it is once daily. Should be taken on an empty stomach because usually food will affect the absorption of Gavreto, and which is why you'll see some medications have to be taken on an empty stomach. Others will need to be taken on a full stomach. It really just depends on the how the medication is absorbed. Sometimes it depends on the fat content of the medication too. That could affect the absorption as well. So just these are all like little pharmacy tidbits that you want to look out for if you go into retail, if you go into hospital. Probably more so with retail. These are like stickers that you'll have to put on the medications. So this one you'd have to put on the Gavreto on an empty stomach sticker. So, all right. So that's enough about Gavreto. I'm going to transition now to Alecensa. Alecensa actually is probably the most widely used medication when it comes to targeted therapies, at least in my portfolio of products. Let me see if I can try to get this bigger here. If there are any questions, feel free to chat it. I know I can't see any of your faces, but if you do have any questions as I go along, please feel free to just chat it to me or come off mute. I know it's always daunting, but you're in good hands, and it's always nice to have some interaction on these presentations as well. All right, so okay, so talking about Alecensa. So Alecensa is the first line ALK positive. It's first line for patients with ALK positive mutations for metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. It was established in a head-to-head global open label phase 3 study called ALEX. And because the ALK positive mutation is so common, there was a bigger sample size in this particular study, 303 patients with stage 3B to 4 ALK positive metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. The trial looked at patients to receive either 600 milligrams orally twice daily of Alecensa, or the competitor arm was crizotinib, and crizotinib was the gold standard, and a lot of people still use it, 250 milligrams twice daily. And again, treatment was given until disease progression or unacceptable toxicity. The primary efficacy endpoint was progression-free survival this time. And additional efficacy endpoints included overall response rates, duration of response, time to the time to CNS progression, because many patients with ALK positive mutations, they have progression into the brain. So one of the good things is that Alecensa does have CNS activity, so which is good, and we'll go through some of that in a little bit. It is the #1 most prescribed, like I mentioned before, first line treatment for ALK positive metastatic non-small cell lung cancer patients. So here's another chart, which is a little bit more clear, looking at the study design. You have, again, I won't go through it again, but you see it here, and you'll see the efficacy endpoints, the primary endpoint, additional efficacy endpoints, patient characteristics. Trying to see here. You'll see a bunch of different histological histological classifications. The CNS metastases at baseline, I mentioned that Alecensa does have CNS effects, and many times there is progression to the brain. And so in the clinical trial, you'll see that there was approximately half and half breakdown of those with CNS metastases and those without. Disease stage was usually stage 4, so it's advanced disease. You'll see a lot of these studies include a good sample size of different races. So you have Asian and non-Asian. The pharmaceutical companies usually try to keep it, or any trial actually will try to keep it as inclusive and diverse as possible, although that's not always possible. But all right, so Alecensa achieved mean progression-free survival. You'll see here, as soon as about 3 months, you'll see a difference in patients who've taken crizotinib versus those who have taken Alecensa, right? And then usually that's the primary analysis, and the studies will look at the results like 10 months later too, or sometimes it's longer, but this is usually a follow-up analysis happens. And you'll see here that Alecensa continues to outperform crizotinib at 34.8 months versus 10.9 months of progression-free survival. So that is a good thing. Here are some additional efficacy endpoints. So usually, it's pretty standard. You look at the primary endpoint, you look at the secondary endpoints. So these are the secondary endpoints. With most studies, you look at the CNS metastases at baseline. So you see that those patients who had a CNS metastases at baseline, this is the number of events that happened in those patients. So usually there's that breakdown as well. So the great news is that Alecensa works in these patients with and without CNS metastases. Okay, and of course, those with CNS metastases usually has, and usually not NE means that there was no data at the time. Usually, if the follow-up analysis is done like later, you'll see here that the patients still, usually they're looking for like a mean progression-free survival. So if the mean had not yet been reached yet, like 50%, then they can't report out on the data yet. And so at the follow-up analysis you see here, there was data 10 months later, there was data reported out. And there was 34.8 months with mean progression-free survival with Alecensa, and then 27.7 months in those patients with CNS metastases. So, intuitively, the patients that had no CNS metastases, they did better on the Alecensa. And that's what you saw. All right, so that's kind of Alecensa for you. Usually, there was some 5-year analysis as well, and the patients continue to do well. So this is the market leader, and so we do see a lot of patients that test ALK positive and get this medication, and they do very well on it. Okay, so I'll transition now to the last medication, which would be Rozlytrek. Okay, so again, Rozlytrek targets ROS1 positive biomarkers and also NTRK gene fusion positive solid tumors. So we're going to focus on the metastatic non-small cell lung cancer part of it. However, just know that Rozlytrek, as long as the patient has that biomarker tested, Rozlytrek is indicated for many, many different tumor types. Okay, so again, Rozlytrek is probably the least frequent. Actually, Gavreto is pretty infrequent as well, but only 1% to 2% of non-small cell lung cancer cases identify ROS1 rearrangement as an oncogenic driver. And also, this group of patients also has CNS metastases that's associated with significant morbidity and poor survival. You never want the cancer to kind of metastasize into the brain. So again, Rozlytrek has CNS activity, and that proves to be a very positive thing for patients to have any sort of CNS activity to kind of stop that spread or stop it from even getting to the brain in the first place. All right, so Rozlytrek is the first FDA-approved ROS1 inhibitor with intracranial response as a pre-specified endpoint. So these are all very newer medications. And so having CNS activity is very positive, and also just even having something that targets ROS1 is also pretty cutting edge as well. Okay, so you'll see again here, Rozlytrek provides a clinically meaningful response. Here again, they're looking at ORR, and those with patients with CNS metastases, 77%, without CNS metastases, 79%. Okay, so you're seeing the pattern here. I apologize if it's very redundant, but the point here is that all of these are targeted therapies. They all work really well as long as you get that biomarker test, and I can't stress enough. So as you guys go into the world and kind of get into your respective different jobs and stuff like that, if you do get into oncology, you really have to make sure that the institution has a good testing protocol in place. And usually the tests are either done in-house or they're sent outside, which you guys know, but that's definitely helps solve a lot of the puzzle. All right, so I just want to show you Rozlytrek for metastatic non-small cell lung cancer is category 2A preferred. So again, still waiting for that category 1, but again, it's a very rare disease. So that's probably why we have the 2A. And then the NTRK gene is the other part that Rozlytrek works on. So you can have the ROS1 positive, or you can have the NTRK gene fusion driver. And as you can see here, there are so many different types of cancers that have that NTRK gene fusion driver as well. All right, let's see. All right, it's 8:50, so I do want to leave some time for questions. Let's see, efficacy. Okay, so here's some efficacy that was studied in real world practice of different cancer types. So you see that ROS1 and NTRK, they do appear in various different types of cancers. So without getting into all of these, I just kind of wanted to point that out. So again, testing is kind of the key here. All right. So I think I'll open it up to questions now to see if anybody has any questions. I went over a lot of information, but hopefully you guys had a good exposure, at least to some of the cutting edge therapies out there, especially when it comes to targeted therapies. Yeah, so let me know if you have any questions. I'll pause here for anybody that might want to say something. And you can also just chat it too.
Hi, I had a quick question.
Sure.
So do you give these presentations very often to different healthcare professionals? What does your daily career job look like?
Yeah, definitely. So I do give these daily presentations. It really depends. So right now, it depends on the geography. So I'm calling on, I cover, probably, I guess the furthest drive would be like three hours for me. So it really just depends on the specialty of the physician. Many oncologists, they either specialize in lung, or they specialize in GI, or they specialize, sometimes some of them are general. And to be honest, most of the time they tell me that they don't see too many of, say, like ROS1 positive patients or RET positive patients. So you just share the information with them, and a lot of it is sort of an interactive discussion on what they're seeing, what are their thoughts. And then most of the data is pretty straightforward, because the medication will get approved, and most of the time the doctors will read or speak to one of us, and they'll see the data. And since they read so many of these trials, it's pretty second nature. Like, they see it works, and a lot of them follow NCCN guidelines. So that's probably the Bible of oncology management. And in oncology, a lot of it is pathway driven. So within the hospitals and stuff like that, they'll have protocols within their physician order entry system. There's different names for it: Epic, Beacon, that kind of thing. And it usually goes by NCCN. So as therapeutic area managers, we'll share what the FDA has approved on label. And after that, it's sort of like relationship building, discussion about, market knowledge and things like that. And then just to kind of be there, because not only do we have information to share, but we also have lots and lots of supportive resources. And we do a lot of educational in-services to their support staff. So pharmacists, nurses, nurse navigators, case managers, social workers, and we call on so many different specialties. So we, for myself, I call on hepatologists, radiologists, surgeons, medical oncologists, pulmonologists, GI. So there's plenty of work to do. So it's not always just one thing that we do, although it's part of our many responsibilities. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Let's see, it looks like we might have one chat. Okay. All right.
I have a question, Tina, but before you get off, I asked a couple things. The first would be, some of these mutations you mentioned are pretty rare. So do you find that it's you have to do a lot of education on basically getting the patients tested for these, or do you feel like this is a pretty standard process? And then also, how do you think pharmacists can help educate others on making sure that our patients are getting tested for these biomarkers?
So because there are so many, and you saw on the timeline, there are so many biomarkers now, and it all started with PD-L1 and then the EGFR, and then all of a sudden we have all of these others. So it is pretty standard practice at this point. It's sometimes in certain communities, like I know, for example, the underserved population, for example, I deal with a city hospital system where they've complained that things are not automatic, things are not in the computer system, so they have to kind of write for everything, and then they have to send it out for testing, and the testing results usually come back like every 2 weeks, or 2 weeks, or the timing depends on the test, to be honest. So in that particular situation, like that's why we have the biomarker testing team to kind of help work with the pathology department within either the hospital or within outside the hospital to try to see how things can be streamlined. Many times it's, lack of resources. And so as pharmaceutical companies, we might work with the customer to see how we can help them like develop the resources. So that's one aspect of it. As pharmacists though, I think if you're like rounding with the doctors, you could just ask them, like, are you guys testing, or how are you testing? And then just like kind of being that liaison to, like if you're on any committees or doing, just kind of like bringing it to the attention of the pathology department, would probably be the best way to kind of intervene. At that point, it's similar to all of our jobs, right? Like everybody kind of has their own lane to work in. And as long as you're communicating the issues and the problems and kind of triaging that or handing off that baton to the right department, at that point, like that, I think that's where pharmacists could get involved. If there's anything, other, where there's like hospital or committees that meet in discussing that patient journey, the pharmacist could certainly chime in on the importance, and just speak up about it, because it is ever so important, especially in the oncology space. So.
Yes, thank you so much. Again,
I think one thing I also like learned in working in the hospital is that like pharmacists are usually, many of them are introverted by nature, very cerebral, very analytical. And I think sometimes like when you are working in a multidisciplinary setting, having that voice to represent pharmacy is very important. I did my residency over in California, and their pharmacists are very different than the ones in the East Coast. They do have a louder voice at the table. They get very much clinically involved, but just something to keep in mind, as you guys like finish up your education and you're getting out there, just to like kind of find that voice to be able to really better like our healthcare system. And especially, at the end of the day, it's all about the patients, right? So we want to better their experience as well.
Tina, I just put a couple of comments in the chat just for my experience with pharmacists that I thought would be helpful. Just an FYI.
Thank you, Lena. And so she wrote, pharmacists are big drivers to finding patients with mutations when a new drug is approved. Additionally, they manage dosing reductions, interruptions. Yes. Thank you, Lena. That absolutely, that's kind of the crux of our job, especially when it comes to medication interventions, side effect management, dose reductions because of the side effects. And the other thing is, work with your pharmaceutical companies, because they have really great resources. I mean, I know my company has developed some really amazing side effect management, dose management guides and brochures. So really working with that for P&T committees and things like that, drug information monographs, that's all stuff that the pharmaceutical reps or personnel can help you with. So definitely tap into them too, because it'll make your life a lot easier so that you don't have to do all the research on your end. So thanks for the comments, Lena.
all right. Thank you again for the presentation. I'm going to steal your screen back real quick, Tina, just to finish up, if that's all right.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Absolutely. Thank you so much to both our presenters tonight. They both did a fantastic job, and NCODA always appreciates your continued support. Just a heads up, our next student educational talk will be December 29th. We will round out the year with 2 fantastic presentations. Look for more information on those presentations to come here soon. I want to make one comment on one of the slides we mentioned, the NCODA Fellowship Showcase. That date we are going to switch to December 1st. So that is a Wednesday, December 1st. Obviously, that information will be continuously supplied to all students as that gets closer. But on the slide, it was different. We are going to move that to the 6th. So just a heads up there. And Tina, I thought you had some amazing comments. All of my APPE students learn about the RECIST criteria and outcomes in oncology trials because I think it's a very important thing to learn. So all of the students out there who weren't very familiar with some of those common oncology outcomes that you'll see in those trials, I think it's important to first understand those, and then it's better to read those trials. So a tidbit there. Last, on behalf of NCODA and myself, we thank you for tuning in to tonight's student educational talks. My name is Cooper Bailey, and we'll see you next month.